So yes, this is a conspiracy, and calling it a conspiracy theory only makes clear no individual could have blown up the Nord Stream pipeline. This was a group. This was a very hard thing to do. It's 70 meters below sea level. It was delayed detonation. If anybody knows about Nord Stream, it's encased in a massive amount of concrete. This was a big operation. So a conspiracy? Absolutely yes. The Russian government asked for an investigation, an independent UN Security Council-led investigation, not a Russian investigation. The Chinese government supported Russia in this, and the United States said, this is a distraction. Maybe I'm wrong. Investigate it. You know? But the United States says, no, don't investigate it. That's a distraction. Well, I think it's a distraction most likely from US culpability. But to not investigate? What kind of attitude is that? And it is, again, I have to emphasize, fundamentally a threat to our democratic institutions. The German government doesn't speak to the German people about this. The Bundestag can't get information. The Swedish government went down to the crime scene and then announced that they would keep their investigation secret from Germany and Denmark. Duh, that's a little strange. Or from the UN Security Council. If people think that secrecy is safety right now, they really misunderstand what's happening. We are at the greatest risk of nuclear war in modern history. We are 90 seconds to midnight, according to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. We've not had a crisis like this since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And our governments don't talk to the people like grown-ups. It's propaganda and spin morning till night.
I've written many stories based on sources, unnamed sources, constantly. Of course, if I name somebody, they'd be fired or worse, jailed. I mean, for absolutely, the law is so strict now. I've never had anybody exposed. And of course, when I say, as I did in this article, a source, period. That's all I say. And over the years, the stories I've written have always been accepted. But, you know, a personal attack is so stupid. It doesn't get to the point. And the point is that, you know, you're not going to like the point. The point is Biden chose to keep you cold this winter. The President of the United States would rather see Germany cold than Germany possibly not support him in the Ukraine. And that, to me, is going to be the devastating thing for this White House. And for me, and I think for the people on the mission and others, was appalling.
And then 3 weeks later now, a news story comes out, which is completely different from Seymour's story, which claims that a Ukrainian group, whatever that is, 6 people, according to Die Zeit and German public broadcasters and others, were in a yacht, in a boat, and put the explosives there. But this story raises a lot of questions. First of all, as you mentioned, Swedish and German authorities said from the outset that it must have been state actors, most probably, because it's a very complex and dangerous operation that is a quasi-military operation in 80 meters depth. So, and I talked to some divers today, and they told me that, I mean, to go to 80 meters, it's really very deep for professional, very well-trained divers. To operate in that depth, only 5 minutes, you need at least 4 hours of decompression. And of course, in 5 minutes, you cannot place the explosives. So you need many, many hours of decompression. So you need a lot of air if not a decompression chamber. And so you need very professional divers and very professional equipment. And it's not clear whether this bunch of 6 people with unknown identities could have run such an operation. There are many other questions coming up. The New York Times says that they are sure that no US and British citizens were involved, while Die Zeit and other German media say they don't know anything about the identities and that they used fake passports. So there are contradictions between the New York Times story and the other story. So for me, it raises a lot of questions. If it turns out that the US did it, that would have huge implications for NATO. If the US bombed crucial infrastructure of their own allies, I mean, we don't know where this ends. That could be the end of NATO. So there is a lot at stake. And all state actors, including the Germans, I mean, there's a lot of fear around that something could turn out that is very detrimental to NATO and others. So we need an independent investigation that is free from these considerations and that takes into account all hints that we have, all stories, the story of Hersh, the news story, and all the other evidence or suggestions that come up.
The reality is that Ukraine is losing. It's being devastated. It's suffering gigantic casualties. A U.S. Marine just told an American media outlet that the average lifespan on a soldier on the front line in Bakhmut is 4 hours. 4 hours. That's shocking. So the reality is, if we keep shipping more weapons to Ukraine, Russia, which as Obama observed many years ago, has escalation dominance in the theater of Ukraine, will always be able to out-escalate the West. It will respond with greater force than is being applied to it. And where this will all end, Zane, is in the complete obliteration of Ukraine. That's where this is going to end. So I categorically reject those who say that the path to peace is more weaponry. I think that's patently absurd. It's amazing that whenever people talk in the West about, these political leaders about vast increases in their military budgets, they just ignore the fact that the collective military budget of NATO prior to the invasion was approximately US $1.2 trillion. The annual military budget of Russia prior to the invasion was approximately US $60 billion. And the annual military budget of China, which has a much larger economy than Russia's, was about 300 billion, I believe 300 to 330 billion. So Russia and China together had a military budget that was well under 50% of NATO's collective military budget. It was actually under 50% of the US military budget. So why aren't we asking why the current expenditure levels are not sufficient to defend NATO countries from the supposed threats being created by Russian and Chinese military expenditures? It's not enough that we're spending 2 to 3 times more in NATO already. Where's this money going? And I think the answer is quite obvious, Zane. The money is going to enrich arms manufacturers, which are robbing us blind. I mean, they are, selling to us military hardware that is extremely overrated and obscenely expensive. Every time they quote a price to us, the price that we pay ends up being a multiple. Somehow these budgets always skyrocket. You see people who are on the boards of major arms manufacturers moving in and outside of government as though there's a revolving door. Then they are trotted out by the mainstream media. These same people who sit on the boards of arms manufacturers, and they're requested to offer their opinions on military threats without there being any disclosure that they actually have financial ties to arms manufacturers. I mean, the military-industrial complex, as Dwight D. Eisenhower warned at the end of his presidency, has effectively destroyed democracy in the West. We are now beholden to the military-industrial complex. And the mere fact that, spending US $1.2 trillion a year is not enough, according to these people, tells you all you need to know about the reality of the situation. We are being robbed blind. This money should be plowed into socially beneficial programs, education, healthcare, transition to a renewable energy economy, addressing homelessness, a growing problem in our society. This is where the money should be going. It's being diverted towards a military budget that's spiraling out of control, and no one has a good answer for why it's not enough already.
The game again is imperial hegemony. That's it. Whatever region you look into, but imperial hegemony. Look at the hypocrisy of Washington, if you will. 750 plus military installations, bases in the world. China has 6. The rest of the world combined has less than 80. We have 750. Who's the empire? Who's the establisher of imperial hegemony? Who's the country that the rest of the world, and increasingly it is, should rail against for what it's doing? We have that article I just told you about that I wrote. They asked me to prove that we have roughly just under a third of the world under some sort of direct or indirect sanction. I just cited them the list of OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control in the Secretary of the Treasury's office. I cited to them their list, and their list is not all encompassing, of the countries we have under sanction. It's incredible. Just China and Russia alone is 2 billion people almost. So we are just the most incredible imperial hegemon the world has seen since Rome. And we beat Rome cold because of the vastness of our empire as compared with the times Rome was existent in. We came down on both sides from roughly 30 to 40,000 warheads for them to 30,000 or so warheads for us, down to around 5,000 or 6,000. An unheard of accomplishment. Then we stopped. And we were largely responsible for the stop. And then we started dismantling the treaties, and then we started thinking about, and we're going to spend $1 trillion plus over the next 10 years, building new weapons. We turned the whole thing around. That is the greatest diplomatic failure in the history of this republic. Historians will write about it if they're alive when they finally realize it. That's how dangerous this is.
Because, when the U.S. draws red lines, the U.S. red lines are around Russia and around China. We talk about China and Russia, or Russia interfering in Ukraine. How many miles is Ukraine away from the United States? When Russia and China draw red lines, they draw it around themselves, but not the U.S. The U.S. view has been that anything that happens anywhere in the world is a threat to U.S. national security, because the U.S. is the world's hegemon. And the world is the U.S. oyster, and anything that happens anywhere is seen as a threat to U.S. national security. We can trace this back to 1950 and the U.S. National Security Action Memos back in 1950, when we defined the world really in terms of American hegemonic vision.
There was a motto in the recent German demonstrations. It said, verhandeln statt schießen. Now, verhandeln is the word for negotiate, to talk. Hand. You reach out the hand to the other person, you try to understand them. Verhandeln statt schießen. Schießen is to shoot, okay? Now that makes good sense. But I have to tell you that it's not welcome in Germany. And I had the privilege of working with Vincent Harding, Dr. Harding, who was the author of Martin Luther King's speech on Vietnam. He had a song, and the song was, "We're going to keep on moving forward. We're going to keep on loving our enemies. We're going to keep on loving our enemies. We're going to keep on loving our enemies. Never turning back. Never turning back." In closing, I will just refer to those children that I noticed more than I usually notice children in the airports today. And what I ask you all, because you have the power to do so, given to you after the last major world war, I ask you to do what's necessary so that no one kills the children anymore. Thank you very much.